Roosevelt announced to the press. And he did. The gold that was confiscated and locked within the vaults of the Fed was never returned to the American people. The legislators who voted for the Gold Reserve Act were told that the increased amount of the precious metal would permit the Federal Reserve to produce enough fiat money to end the Depression. They were hoodwinked into believing that the fractional reserve system mandated a new issuance of currency that must be backed by a reserve of 10% of its worth. And they were totally unaware that Roosevelt, upon the advice of his closest advisor, was planning to do away with the gold standard. Citizens become criminals. The federal mandate implied that government was the rightful owner of all the gold in the nation, and that no American had a right to possess the precious metal. Roosevelt branded all those who did not turn over their gold as hoarders. He defined hoarding as the withdrawal and withholding of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates from the recognized and customary channels of trade. Those who refused to comply with this order faced 10 years in prison and a fine of $10,000. Those who complied with the order received $20.66 per ounce for their gold. Citizens had accepted a paper currency based on the government's pledge to redeem it in gold at $20.66 per ounce. Then, when Roosevelt decided to default on that pledge, he also felt obliged to turn all citizens holding gold into criminals. Scores of Americans were now rounded up, fined, and sent to the slammer for having a fistful of gold dollars. Foreign gold. Foreigners also had gold confiscated and were forced to accept paper money as payment. The Ibersee Finanzkorporation, a Swiss banking company, had $1,250,000 in gold coins for business use, which it entrusted to an American firm for safekeeping. In 1934, the Ibersee finance officials were shocked to find that their gold was confiscated by the U.S. government. They made appeals, but the appeals were denied. The officials were told that they were only entitled to paper money, but not their gold coins. The Swiss company would have lost 40% of their gold's value if they tried to buy the same amount of gold with the paper money that they received in exchange for their confiscated coins. Roosevelt stated that the ban on private ownership of the precious metal was the first step also to that complete control of all monetary gold in the United States, which was essential in order to give the government that element of freedom of action which was necessary as the very basis of its monetary goal and objective. The Fed now began to churn out cash at an unprecedented level. The dollar lost 93% of its purchasing power, while the value of an ounce of gold rose to $35. A congressman's outcry. In 1933, Representative Louis T. McFadden of Pennsylvania took to the floor of Congress to denounce FDR's action as follows. Roosevelt seized the gold value of 40 billions or more of bank deposits in the United States banks. Those deposits were deposits of gold values. By his action, he has rendered them payable to the depositors in paper only, if payable at all, and the paper money he proposes to pay out to bank depositors and to the people generally in lieu of their hard-earned gold values in itself, and being based on nothing into which the people can convert it, the said paper money is of negligible value altogether. The people of the U.S. are now using unredeemable paper slips for money. The Treasury cannot redeem that paper in gold or silver. The gold and silver of the Treasury has unlawfully been given to the corrupt and dishonest Fed, and the administration has since had the effrontery to raid the country for more gold for the private interests by telling our patriotic citizens that their gold is needed to protect the currency. It is not being used to protect the currency. It is being used to protect the corrupt and dishonest Fed. The directors of these institutions have committed criminal offense against the United States government, including the offense of making false entries on their books, and the still more serious offense of unlawfully abstracting funds from the United States Treasury. Roosevelt's gold raid is intended to help them out of the pit they dug for themselves when they gambled away the wealth and savings of the American people. In the wake of making these remarks, McFadden experienced 2 attempts on his life. The first came in the form of 2 gunmen who fired at the congressman after he alighted from a cab in front of a leading hotel in the nation's capital. The shots missed him. The second occurred when McFadden ingested food that had been poisoned at a Washington political gathering. His life was saved by a physician friend who procured a stomach pump and administered emergency treatment. The rescue, however, failed to save the country from its inevitable fate. In 1936, McFadden was voted out of office. The mystery of the missing gold. The gold did not remain within the vaults of Fort Knox, a military facility constructed by FDR to house it. Tons of it were reportedly shipped to Basel, Switzerland, for the creation of the Bank for International Settlements, BIS. This monstrous facility was to serve as the central bank of all central banks, a Rockefeller-controlled entity that would oversee the economies of countries throughout the world. Additional tons were sold at rock-bottom prices to foreign banks and businesses of the money cartel. In 1974, when all the gold was gone from Fort Knox, President Richard Nixon repealed the Gold Act of 1934, making it possible for Americans to purchase gold again. As a result, gold prices soared to new heights, and the value of the bullion of the BIS and the money cartel became virtually incalculable. As soon as Nixon issued the repeal, Louise Boyer, the longtime personal secretary of Nelson Rockefeller, penned an article for the National Tatler, stating that the Rockefellers had instrumented the heist and had sold much of the gold to their foreign counterparts. 3 days after the article appeared, Ms. Boyer mysteriously fell to her death from the 10th floor of her New York City apartment. The death of Boyer prompted Ed Durrell, a wealthy Ohio industrialist, to launch a one-man campaign to solve the mystery of the missing gold. He sent thousands of letters to government officials, demanding to know how much gold remained at Fort Knox. In response to one of his letters, Edith Roosevelt, the granddaughter of President Roosevelt, wrote, "Allegations of missing gold from our Fort Knox vaults are being widely discussed in European financial circles. But what is puzzling is that the administration is not hastening to demonstrate conclusively that there is no cause for concern over our gold treasure, if indeed it is in a position to do so." Durrell went to his death without fulfilling his mission, and, as of this writing, no audit of the gold supposedly stored at Fort Knox has ever been conducted. A presidential puppet. After confiscating the gold, the Roosevelt administration appeared to set the price of the precious metal at random. Every morning at 9 o'clock, Henry Morgenthau, the Secretary of the Treasury, Jesse Jones, the head of the Financial Reconstruction Corporation, and George Warren, the country's leading economic advisor, would meet with FDR over his breakfast of soft-boiled eggs to determine the gold price for that day. They began at $31.36 an ounce. The next morning, this rate was hiked to $31.54, then $31.76, and $31.82. It seemed as though they were acting at random. The morning exercise only served to push the price a little higher than the day before. On November 3, 1933, Roosevelt suggested that the cost of an ounce of gold should be raised 21 cents. When the others asked why, the president explained that it was a lucky number, 3 times 7. But the pricing was neither arbitrary nor capricious. Roosevelt, throughout his years in the Oval Office, remained manipulated by the money trust. in FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law, Curtis Dahl, a syndicate manager for Lehman Brothers, who married Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, wrote, "For a long time, I felt that FDR had developed many thoughts and ideas that were his own to benefit this country, the United States. But he didn't. Most of his thoughts, his political ammunition, as it were carefully manufactured for him in advance by the Council on Foreign Relations, One World Money Group. Brilliantly, with great gusto, like a fine piece of artillery, he exploded that prepared ammunition in the middle of an unsuspecting target, the American people, and thus paid off and returned his internationalist political support." Roosevelt, as Liaquat Ahamed confirmed in Lords of Finance, did not even pretend to grasp the subtleties of international finance. He received direction in part from James Warburg, who served as FDR's chief financial advisor. The son of the founder of the Fed, Warburg would later tell a U.S. Senate subcommittee, "We shall have a one-world government, whether we like it or not. The question is only whether world government will be achieved by consent or conquest." The end of Western civilization. Under the direction of Warburg, Acheson, Nelson Rockefeller, and other prominent members of the Council on Foreign Relations, Roosevelt secretly removed America from the gold standard on June 5, 1933. Informed of this decision, Lewis Douglas, the director of the Bureau of the Budget, proclaimed, "The end of Western civilization. The value of the dollar plummeted, the prices for everyday goods skyrocketed, and unemployed Americans wandered the streets. Whenever the panhandlers saw the wizened and wigged nonagenarian appearing from Rockefeller Center, they removed their caps to ask, 'Brother, can you spare a dime?' The old man never refused them. He automatically fished one of the small coins from his pocket and said, 'God bless you, and God bless Standard Oil.'"